After 28 years with Richard, I thought I knew every inch of that man. I'd raised our 2 kids pretty much on my own while he built his career. I'd swallowed so many absences, so many cold dinners, so many nights sleeping alone waiting for him to get home. But I always believed that, in the end, when we got older, it'd just be the 2 of us, that all that sacrifice would pay off, until the day I saw a text on his phone. "I miss you," said our neighbor Amanda. My world came crashing down right there. I was 62 years old, gray hair, body worn out from taking care of everybody. And him, he was having an affair with a woman 15 years younger who lived 3 houses down. I texted back for him. "Me too. I'm home alone." When the doorbell rang 10 minutes later and I opened the door, his face went white as a sheet. That's when it hit me. I'd spent decades building a life with a man who was never really mine. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you everything from the beginning. Let me back up a bit and explain how we ended up at that moment in the kitchen. My name's Helen. I'm 62 years old, and when all this went down, it was a Tuesday in March, one of those boring fall afternoons where you don't know whether to put on a jacket or not. I'd been home since I retired from the school where I'd worked as a secretary for 35 years. Richard was 65 and still worked part-time at a financial consulting firm. He'd always been ambitious, always wanted to have the best, prove he was capable. We lived in a quiet, upper-middle-class neighborhood, you know, the kind where houses have front yards and white picket fences, where everybody knows each other by sight and people still wave when they drive by. Our house had 3 bedrooms, an open-concept kitchen I'd always dreamed of having, and a back porch where I grew my orchids. It was a beautiful place, cozy, full of memories. We had 2 grown kids, Marcus at 32, civil engineer, married and living in Denver, and Jennifer at 29, lawyer, single, and living in Chicago because of the firm where she worked. It was just me and Richard now in that house, way too big for 2 people. And I thought we were finally going to be able to enjoy this time together, you know? Travel to those places we'd always talked about but never went. Do those things we'd always put off because of the kids, the bills, life's craziness. I had this mental list of dreams tucked away, visiting Italy, taking a cruise, spending a whole month just relaxing on some beach somewhere. I thought this was our time. Our routine was pretty calm, almost boring if I'm being honest. Richard would head out to work 3 times a week, get back in the mid-afternoon. I'd stay home taking care of things, cleaning, gardening. Sometimes I'd see my friends for coffee or a walk in the park. We'd have lunch together when he was home, always had dinner together watching the news. On weekends, we'd do the grocery shopping, cook, watch a movie. It was a predictable life, and I liked it. I liked the security, the stability. After years of raising kids, working, running around from one place to another, that quiet felt like a blessing. But looking back now, I realize we turned into roommates more than husband and wife. We split the bills, split the space, split the routine. But real intimacy, that deep connection, had been lost for a while now. I can't remember the last time we'd really talked, you know. Those kinds of conversations about dreams, fears, about what each of us was feeling. We'd talk about what was for dinner, about the electric bill that came in high, about Marcus thinking about having a second kid, but about us, about what I was feeling, about what I wanted. That never came up, and I'd let it happen. I'd gotten comfortable in that role of efficient wife, organized homemaker, mom always available when the kids called needing something. But Helen, the woman who existed underneath all those roles, she'd gotten hidden away somewhere. Even I didn't know how to find anymore. That particular Tuesday, Richard had gotten off work early. I think it was around 3 in the afternoon when he got home. He came through the garage door with that smile I knew so well, the smile of someone who was in a good mood, and announced he was going to make his famous roast chicken. I was in the laundry room folding clothes I'd taken off the line, bath towels, sheets, his shirts that I insisted on ironing, even though he'd say it wasn't necessary. He showed up at the laundry room door, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, one of those automatic kisses from a couple who's been together for decades, and said he was going to fix a special dinner. I thought it was kind of weird right then, 'cause it wasn't anybody's birthday, wasn't any special occasion. But I figured maybe he was just being sweet, trying to do something nice. Now I know he was probably feeling guilty, that this was his twisted way of easing his conscience. But in that moment, I just smiled and said that'd be great, that I loved it when he cooked. And it was true. He cooked well, had that natural talent for seasonings and timing. On weekends he liked to make those fancier dishes, and I'd always praised that, always made a point of appreciating it. How many of my friends complained that their husbands couldn't even fry an egg? Richard knew how to make everything from simple rice to complex recipes he'd see online and decide to try. I felt lucky about that. How ironic. I headed back to the laundry room with that good feeling of someone who was gonna have a nice dinner without having to cook. Kept folding clothes at my own pace, listening to him move around in the kitchen, the fridge opening and closing, water running in the sink, the cutting board tapping on the counter, familiar sounds, comforting sounds, sounds of home. After about 20 minutes, I grabbed the basket with the folded clothes and went to the bedroom to put everything away in the closet. That's when I walked past the kitchen and saw him there, back to me, working on the chicken that was already in a big roasting pan. He'd put on that navy blue apron I'd given him for our last wedding anniversary. 28 years together, celebrated with dinner at an Italian restaurant and his promise that the next years would be even better. He was humming softly to an old R&B song, one of those that used to play on the radio when we were young. The smell of rosemary and garlic was already spreading through the house, that aroma that always made me feel like we had something special, something solid. That's when his cell phone buzzed on the counter, a simple sound, ordinary, that shouldn't have meant anything. But his reaction is what caught my attention. He stopped humming right away, looked at the phone with an expression I couldn't quite figure out. Was it tension? Was it anticipation? Whatever it was, it wasn't natural. He grabbed the phone, looked at the screen, and I swear I saw his jaw clench. He just stood there for like 2-3 seconds, and then just put the phone back on the counter, screen down, and went back to working on the chicken with this exaggerated, forced concentration. My stomach twisted into a knot. I can't really explain what it was, but something about that reaction bothered me deeply. You know when you've known someone for so long that you can sense when something's off? That was exactly it. It wasn't normal. Richard had always been chill about his phone, always answered calls in front of me, read messages out loud when it was something funny someone had sent. We'd never had that thing of hiding phones from each other. We'd never had passwords on our devices. His was always unlocked on the coffee table. Mine too. It was a trust I thought was rock solid after almost 3 decades together. But that gesture of flipping the cell phone screen down, that tension in his body, that wasn't the Richard I knew. I kept walking to the bedroom like I hadn't seen anything, but my heart was racing. I put the clothes away in the closet on autopilot, not paying attention to what I was doing. My head was spinning. Was I just imagining things? Was I creating a problem where there wasn't one? Maybe it was a work message, something annoying he didn't want to deal with right then. I tried to convince myself of that, but I couldn't. That tightness in my chest was still there, growing. I spent about 5 minutes in the bedroom, organizing drawers that were already organized, just to calm myself down. I took a few deep breaths. "You're being paranoid, Helen," I told myself. "The long marriages are like this. Sometimes we find behaviors strange that are nothing." But it didn't help. That bad feeling wouldn't go away. I went back to the hallway and walked slowly to the kitchen. He was still there, now seasoning potatoes he was gonna roast with the chicken. The cell phone was still on the counter, screen down. I leaned against the doorframe and watched him for a moment. My husband, the man I'd married when I was 34 and he was 37. The man who held my hand in the delivery room when Marcos was born. The man who cried with me when my mom died. The man who'd built this whole life by my side. Did I really know him? Or had we spent so much time just coexisting that I'd stopped really paying attention? He noticed I was there and turned his head, gave me a smile. "It's gonna be delicious," he said, pointing at the roasting pan. "Gotta let it marinate another 15 minutes or so before it goes in the oven." I forced a smile back. "Looks great." My voice came out weird even to me, kind of robotic. If he noticed, he didn't show it. He went back to focusing on the potatoes. I said I was gonna go back to the bedroom to finish straightening up some things, but really I just wanted to get out of there. That atmosphere was suffocating me. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall without really seeing anything. My head was in a whirlwind. I started thinking about things I might have ignored these past few months. Richard had changed some subtle things in his routine. He'd started going to the gym again, something he hadn't done in years. Said the doctor had recommended it because of high cholesterol, and I thought it was great, even encouraged it. He'd also bought new clothes, more modern, different from the more formal style he'd always worn. When I mentioned it, he laughed and said he wanted to take better care of himself, that he didn't want to be that sloppy old guy. I laughed along, thought it was sweet, but now, sitting there on that bed, those memories started fitting together in a way that made me nauseous. And there was more. These past few months he'd started going out for walks in the late afternoon, something he'd never done before. Said he needed to move around, that sitting too long at the office was bad for him. He'd always come back more upbeat from those walks, more energized. I'd even mentioned to a friend that he had more energy, that he seemed younger. She said exercise really did work wonders, but was it just exercise? Or was he coming back from those walks pumped up for a completely different reason? I felt my breathing get heavy. No, I couldn't just start creating scenarios in my head without being sure of anything. But I also couldn't just ignore that bad feeling. I got up from the bed and started pacing back and forth across the bedroom. I heard him in the kitchen, the sound of the faucet, probably washing his hands. And then I heard footsteps heading toward the pantry that was in a little room next to the kitchen. He always kept the fresh herbs there, in a little basket I'd bought at a craft fair years ago. This was my chance. My heart took off. I left the bedroom quietly, barefoot on the wood floor, and went to the kitchen. His cell phone was there, alone on the counter, next to the cutting board, still dirty with chopped garlic. I looked toward the pantry hallway. He was in there. I could hear him moving things around on the shelves. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands. No password, never had one. The screen lit up and showed the last notification he'd received. It was a text, and when I read the name of who'd sent it, I felt the floor disappear from under my feet. Amanda Mitchell, our neighbor. The blonde woman in her mid-40s who lived 3 houses down, married to Tom, that nice guy with glasses who worked in tech and traveled a lot. The message was right there, on the lock screen, visible. I miss you. 3 words, just 3 words that seemed so simple but carried such enormous weight. I miss you. It wasn't I miss our conversation or I miss talking to you guys. It was I miss you. Personal, intimate, final. I stood there, holding that cell phone like it was burning my hand, and felt a wave of heat rise from my chest to my head. Amanda, the neighbor who always greeted us on the street with that perfect smile, super white, like someone who got expensive teeth whitening. The one who wore those workout leggings and sports bra just to go get the mail in the late afternoon. The one who'd come to our anniversary barbecue in January, it hadn't even been a year yet, and brought a lemon pie for dessert, all friendly, all nice, asking about my grandkids that didn't even exist yet. I'd thought she was sweet. I'd talked with her about recipes, about the plants in her yard that looked beautiful, about the summer heat, and the whole time she was with my husband, I felt my stomach turn, an urgent need to throw up. I heard his footsteps coming back from the pantry. On impulse, without really thinking about what I was doing, I unlocked the phone. He had his face registered, but the device accepted my face too, because we'd used each other several times for simple stuff. I went into the messages, found the conversation with Amanda. There wasn't much there. He probably deleted things, but that last message from her was there. And below it, some earlier messages from the day before. "Tomorrow, Tom's traveling again," she'd written, and he'd replied, "I know, can't wait, can't wait." Those words kept echoing in my head like a scream. He couldn't wait to see her, to be with her. While I was there, in our house, folding his clothes, taking care of his stuff, planning his future with me, he was counting down the hours to be with another woman. I heard his footsteps getting closer. There was no time to read anything else. My brain was working in slow motion and at top speed at the same time. I went back to the messaging app, to the conversation with Amanda, and before I could think about the consequences, my fingers were already typing. "Me too. I'm home alone." I hit send, pressed the send button, and that was it. No going back now. I put the phone back exactly where it was, screen down like he'd left it, and got out of the kitchen as fast as I could without making noise. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he'd be able to hear it. I went into the bedroom, closed the door slowly, and leaned against it with my back, trying to breathe. What had I just done? I'd answered a message for him. I'd set up a meeting with his mistress, but I needed to know. I needed to be absolutely sure what was going on, because up until that moment there was still a part of me, small, desperate, that wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. I sat on the bed and kept staring at the clock on the nightstand. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. How long would it take for her to see the message? How long would it take for her to come over here, if she even would? Because she would come, right? If there was any innocence in this story, she'd text back asking something, finding the response weird. But if she just showed up, then I'd have my definitive answer. I heard Richard going back to the kitchen, the sound of him putting the chicken in the oven, the timer being set. Normal sounds. Sounds of an ordinary day, but nothing was ordinary anymore. Everything had changed in the last 10 minutes, and he had no idea. I sat there, motionless, with sweaty palms and my heart racing. I started breaking out in a cold sweat. What if I was wrong? What if Amanda was just a friend and I just created a horrible situation out of baseless jealousy? But no, those messages weren't from friends. Can't wait. Friends don't talk like that. And I miss you isn't something you send to a casual neighbor in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I grabbed my own phone and opened her Instagram. I followed Amanda, like I followed several neighbors. I started scrolling through her feed, looking for what? Some clue, some proof. The photos were always the same stuff. Her at the gym, her with healthy smoothies, her and Tom at restaurants, her with that perfect smile and that blonde hair, always flawless. A seemingly perfect life, just like mine seemed to be until half an hour ago. It didn't even take 10 minutes. I heard the doorbell ring. 10 minutes. It took her 10 minutes to see the message. Get ready, if she even needed to get more ready than she already was, and walk 3 houses to ours. 10 minutes. My blood ran cold. I got up from the bed so fast I got dizzy for a second. I heard the sound of the spatula hitting the counter in the kitchen, heard Richard's hurried footsteps heading toward the door. He wasn't expecting her. Of course not. He thought I'd gone out, that I was somewhere away from home because that's what the message said. I'm home alone. But I was there, and I was gonna see everything with my own eyes. I left the bedroom and went to the hallway that gave a view of the front door. I stayed about 10 feet behind him, leaning against the wall, able to see everything but not completely exposed yet. He opened the door, and there she was, Amanda Mitchell, wearing a low-cut white blouse that showed more than it hid, light jeans that hugged every curve of her body, blonde hair loose on her shoulders, perfume I could smell from where I was standing, something sweet, cloying. She had that smile on her face, that smile of someone who was happy, excited, until her eyes moved inside the house and saw me there, standing in the hallway. The smile died instantly, and Richard's face, his face, when he realized I was there, when he understood what had happened. I'll never forget that expression. It was pure terror. The color completely drained from his face, turned that grayish white of someone who just got the biggest shock of their life. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He stood there frozen, hand still on the doorknob, completely paralyzed. The silence that settled in that moment was one of the most deafening things I've ever experienced in my life. It wasn't just absence of sound, it was a heavy, dense vacuum loaded with unspoken truths that were now screaming there in my house's hallway. Amanda kept standing in the doorway, eyes wide, going back and forth between me and Richard, like she was trying to calculate the best way out of this situation. And there was something in her look that cut me even deeper. It wasn't just embarrassment or surprise. There was irritation there, like I had messed something up. Like I was the problem in this equation, me, in my own house, being seen as an obstacle by the woman who was sleeping with my husband. The anger that rose inside me in that instant was different from anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't that explosive anger that makes you scream and break things. It was a cold, calculated anger that makes you super clear-headed. I took a step forward, coming out of the hallway shadows and entering completely into her line of sight. I crossed my arms and just stared. I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to see what they were going to do, how they were going to try to explain themselves. Richard was so pale, I thought he was going to pass out right there. Amanda recovered her composure first, or tried to, at least. She gave that nervous little laugh people give when they're lying and said something about coming to borrow a cake pan, that her mom was visiting over the weekend and she wanted to make a cake but had lent her pan to a friend and forgot to get it back. The lie came out quick, even rehearsed, like she'd already prepared excuses for emergency situations like this. But it was a pathetic lie, full of holes. I didn't even have any cake pan lent to her. We barely talked beyond sidewalk greetings, beyond, "Hi, how are you?" when we'd run into each other getting the mail or watering the plants. Never, in all the years she'd lived on that street, had she come to my house for anything. And now she was coming to borrow a cake pan, in that outfit, with that perfume, 10 minutes after getting a message saying, "I'm home alone." I looked at her right in the eyes and said with a calm that surprised even me, "Funny, Amanda, because I don't remember you asking to borrow any cake pan." My voice came out firm, controlled, each word well pronounced. She turned red, not that light red of someone who's embarrassed, that blotchy or uneven red that rises from the neck and takes over the whole face when you're caught in a blatant lie. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. She stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, desperately searching for some other excuse that might work. That's when I looked at Richard. He'd finally moved, had closed the door a bit, I think out of instinct, so the other neighbors wouldn't see that whole scene, but he still couldn't manage to speak. His eyes were fixed on me, and there was so much panic there, it almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "Richard," I said, and my voice stayed strangely calm. "I think you'd better explain to Amanda that I'm home, since you told her you were alone." There, I threw it in their faces. There was no more pretending, no more dodging. He ran his hand over his face, that gesture he always did when he was nervous, and mumbled something inaudible. "Louder," I asked. "I didn't hear you." He looked at Amanda, then at me, and could only manage to say, "Helen, I can explain." I laughed, a short, dry laugh with no humor at all. "Explain," I repeated. "You're going to explain what exactly, Richard? Are you going to explain to me why our neighbor is here, all dressed up, 10 minutes after you told her you were home alone? Are you going to explain that message she sent saying she misses you? Or are you going to explain yesterday's message where you said you couldn't wait?" With each word I spoke, he shrank more. Amanda had taken a step back, clearly wanting to disappear from there. But I wasn't gonna let her. Not yet. I looked at her again. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you two been doing this?" She didn't answer, just stood there staring at the floor. "Amanda, I asked you a question," I insisted, and my voice finally started to shake. Not from fear, but from contained rage, from humiliation, from pain. Amanda looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something different on her face. It looked like guilt, or maybe it was just discomfort at being caught. I'm sorry," she mumbled, and her voice came out thin, almost childlike. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be like this." as if there was a right way to betray someone, as if there was an appropriate way for you to sleep with your neighbor's husband. How was it supposed to be then? I asked, and now my voice was definitely shaking. Explain it to me, Amanda, because I'm really curious to understand. How exactly was it supposed to be? She didn't answer, just kept staring at her own feet, at the white gym shoes that probably cost more than my salary for a month when I was still working. Richard finally found his voice. Helen, please, let's talk inside, not here. He looked nervously at the street, at the possibility of some neighbor seeing that scene. Of course. He was worried about appearances, about what others would think, not about what he'd done to me, not about the 28 years he'd thrown in the trash, but about appearances. No, I said, firmly. Here's just fine. Actually, Amanda, since you came all the way over here, why don't you come in? We can have some coffee, chat about how you two have been spending time together while I, like an idiot, thought I had a real marriage. The sarcasm in my voice was cutting even to myself. Amanda shook her head quickly. I'm leaving, she said, already turning around. Amanda, wait, Richard called out. And that was the last straw. He'd called her. He'd asked her to wait, in front of me, right to my face. Like she was someone who deserved consideration in that moment. Like I wasn't standing there bleeding inside, falling apart. No, I said, and my voice came out loud, firm, final. No, Richard, you're not gonna ask her for anything. You're not gonna do anything. She's leaving now, and you're gonna stay here, and you're gonna give me every detail of what you two did. Every damn detail. Amanda practically ran. She went down the 3 steps of our front porch, so fast she almost tripped, and walked off quickly down the sidewalk toward her house. She didn't look back once. I stood there at the door, watching her walk away. The woman who'd destroyed my life without thinking twice. The woman who'd looked at me countless times, had smiled at me, had pretended to be polite and friendly, while she was in my bed with my husband. Because it had been in my bed, hadn't it? That was the question burning in my throat. Had they done it in my bed? At her house? Where? I closed the door slowly and turned to face Richard. He was leaning against the hallway wall, shoulders slumped, hands shaking. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 15 minutes. Good. Let him feel at least a fraction of what I was feeling. How long? I asked again, my voice coming out lower now. Tired. He didn't answer right away. He stood there, looking at the floor, and I saw a tear roll down his face. He was crying. The man who'd betrayed me was crying, like he was the victim in this story. 6 months, he finally mumbled, so low I almost didn't hear. 6 months. Half a year. Half of an entire year he'd been living this lie. I felt my legs go weak. I leaned against the wall so I wouldn't fall. 6 months, I repeated, letting the words come out slowly, feeling the weight of each one. You spent 6 months deceiving me, looking me in the face every day, sleeping next to me every night. 6 months, he sobbed, ran his hands over his face. Helen, I didn't want. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That phrase again. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How did it happen then? I asked. And now I needed to know. I needed to understand how we'd gotten there, how I hadn't seen it, how I'd been so blind. He took a deep breath, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and started talking. Said he'd gotten to know Amanda better at a neighborhood party back in September, one of those get-togethers that people on the street organized, that they talked, that she was easy to talk to, that he felt seen, like I didn't see him, like I hadn't spent 3 decades of my life seeing him, taking care of him, loving him. He kept talking, and each word was like a stab wound. Said that after that party they started talking more, that they exchanged messages about silly stuff at first, about the weather, about the houses, about the neighborhood, innocent messages according to him, but then they started running into each other, by chance, on their walks. She also walked in the late afternoon, same time as him. What a convenient coincidence. They'd talk while they walked, and these conversations got longer, more personal. She complained about her marriage to Tom, said he traveled a lot, that she felt lonely, and Richard, poor thing, identified with that. He also felt lonely, according to him. Lonely with me in the same house. Lonely while I made his coffee every morning, while I ironed his clothes, while I took care of the house that was ours. He felt lonely. I stayed quiet, letting him talk, because I needed to hear everything, even though each word was killing me inside. He told me that one day, about 6 months ago actually, Tom had traveled and she invited him over for coffee at her place. Just coffee. Of course it was just coffee. And he went to her house, had coffee, talked for hours, and then it happened. It happened, he said, like it was something outside his control, like their clothes had just fallen off their bodies by themselves. I asked, voice shaking, "Here, did you do it here in our house?" He shook his head quickly. "No, never. It was always at her place, when Tom was traveling, or in her car a few times. In her car, I pictured my 65-year-old husband having sex in the back seat of a car like some teenager, and the absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But there was nothing funny about it. Nothing at all. "And you thought I wouldn't find out?" I asked. "You really thought you could keep this hidden forever?" He finally looked me in the eyes, and what I saw there was pathetic. It was a broken man, ashamed, but also, and this made me even more furious, there was self-pity. He felt sorry for himself. "I was gonna end it," he said. "I swear I was. I was trying to find the right way, the right time. I didn't want to hurt you." I gave another bitter laugh. "You didn't want to hurt me, Richard. You spent 6 months sleeping with another woman. You spent 6 months lying to me every single day. And you didn't want to hurt me." My voice had risen. I was almost yelling now. All that control I'd maintained was starting to crack. "So, what did you think was going to happen when I found out? That I was going to pat you on the back and say, 'It's okay, honey. It happens.'" He tried to come closer to me, reach out his hand, but I took a step back. "Don't touch me," I said through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare touch me now." He stopped, hand still stretched out in the air, and then let it drop limply to his side. "Helen, forgive me. Please. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I love you. I've always loved you. I don't know what came over me. It was crazy, a stupid existential crisis. Stop." I cut him off. "Stop talking. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear about your existential crisis. You didn't think about me once during those 6 months. You didn't think about our kids, our family, everything we built. You only thought about yourself." I walked to the living room and sat on the couch because my legs weren't holding me upright anymore. He followed me but stayed standing, at a safe distance. The smell of the chicken roasting was still in the air. That aroma of rosemary and garlic that used to bring me comfort and now just made me nauseous. How was I gonna eat that dinner? How was I gonna sit at the table and pretend everything was normal? Is there anyone else? I asked suddenly, a question I didn't even know was in my head until it came out of my mouth. Besides Amanda, was there anyone else? He stayed silent for too long, and it was in that silence that I got my answer. Answer me, I demanded, and my voice was dangerously low now, that calm that comes before the storm. He swallowed hard, ran his hand over the back of his neck in that nervous gesture I knew so well. There was once, years ago, on a work trip. I felt the world spin. It wasn't just Amanda. It wasn't just 6 months. There was more. There was history. There was a pattern. When, my voice came out hoarse. About 8 years ago, maybe. It was a one-night thing at a conference in New York. I drank too much. It was a terrible mistake. I never saw the woman again after that night. 8 years ago, he'd betrayed me, and I didn't know. 8 years ago, I was at home, probably taking care of his stuff, worried about his trip, sending messages asking if he'd gotten to the hotel, okay, if he'd had dinner, if everything was all right, and he was there in a hotel bed with some random stranger. How many times, Richard? I asked, and now the tears finally started falling. I couldn't hold them back anymore. How many times did you cheat on me while I stayed here like an idiot, thinking we had something real? Just those 2, he said quickly, desperately. I swear just those 2. The New York one was a mistake, one night. Nothing happened again until Amanda. Just those 2, I repeated, and the bitterness in my voice was tangible. Like 2 betrayals were no big deal. Like cheating on your wife twice in 28 years of marriage was something acceptable because it was only 2 times. I wiped the tears angrily, hating that I was crying in front of him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken, but I couldn't control it anymore. Everything was coming out now. All the pain, all the anger, all the disappointment built up, not just from that day, but from years. Years of feeling invisible. Years of swallowing his absence, of sleeping alone on cold nights because he was traveling, of raising our kids pretty much as a single mom because he was always busy building his career. And I'd accepted all of that because I thought it was temporary, that eventually we'd have our time, our reward for all that waiting. But there was no reward waiting. There were just more lies, more betrayal, more loneliness disguised as marriage. You used me, I said, and the clarity of those words hit me like lightning. You used me as insurance. I was the safe base, the reliable wife who'd always be here, always available, always taking care of everything while you did whatever you wanted out there. He started really crying now, that ugly cry of someone who's lost control. It wasn't like that, he sobbed. Helen, I love you. I've always loved you. I was an idiot, selfish, but you have to believe that I love you. You don't know what love is, I replied, and I got up from the couch. I couldn't stay there anymore, in that space, with him. Love isn't what you felt for me, Richard. Love isn't keeping someone trapped in a lie while you have your fun out there. Love isn't using someone as your base while you look for excitement in other places. I walked to the bedroom and locked the door. I heard him calling me from the other side, knocking softly, asking to talk more, saying we needed to work this out, but I had nothing more to say to him right then. I needed to be alone. I needed to process. I lay on the bed, on my side of the bed where I'd slept for 28 years, and stared at the ceiling. I could hear him on the other side of the door still, crying softly, then footsteps walking away. I heard the guest room door open and close. Good. At least he'd figured out he wasn't gonna sleep in here with me tonight, or ever again if it was up to me. I stayed there in the dark, alone, and let it all out. I cried for hours. I cried for the woman who'd been betrayed. I cried for the naive version of myself who'd believed everything. I cried for the 28 years that seemed to have been a lie. But I also cried from relief. Because deep down, way deep down, a part of me was relieved to finally know the truth. To not be living in ignorance anymore. The following days were the hardest of my life. I kept functioning. I'd wake up, shower, get dressed. But it was like I was on autopilot, a zombie going through the motions without really being present. Richard tried to talk to me all the time, followed me around the house apologizing, begging for a chance to explain better, to fix things. But I couldn't look at him without feeling sick, without seeing his hands on another woman, without imagining the kisses, the whispered promises, the lies told. He said he'd blocked Amanda's number, that he'd never talk to her again, that he'd do whatever it took to win back my trust. As if trust was something you win back just like that, with empty promises. I started noticing everything I'd ignored before. The way he avoided my gaze during breakfast. How uncomfortable he got when I grabbed his phone to check the time or look for a contact. I realized he'd changed his laptop password about 3 months ago, said at the time it was for security, that he'd read about hackers and wanted to protect our information. Lies. It was to keep me out, to hide the evidence. I started wondering how many other things I'd accepted without questioning, how many red flags I'd ignored because it was easier to believe everything was fine. A week after that Tuesday that changed everything, I ran into Amanda at the supermarket. It was a Thursday morning. I was in the dairy aisle grabbing yogurt when I saw her turning the corner with her cart. Our eyes met for a split second. I saw panic flash across her face, that deer in the headlights expression. And then she just turned her cart around and headed in the opposite direction, disappearing between the cereal shelves like I was some kind of monster she needed to avoid at all costs. I stood there, holding a container of Greek yogurt, watching her run away, and I felt a weird mix of emotions. Anger, obviously. How dare she be there, living her normal life, grocery shopping like she hadn't destroyed my family. But I also felt something unexpected. Pity. Pity for her, because she was pathetic in the end. A woman in her mid-40s who thought sleeping with her neighbor's husband was some kind of achievement. A woman who needed validation from married men because she probably couldn't find it anywhere else. And I felt angry at myself too, for wasting any emotional energy on her. She didn't even deserve my anger. She was irrelevant. It was that night that I made my decision. I was lying in bed, alone once again because Richard was still in the guest room, and I realized something fundamental. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Every room had memories that were now contaminated. The kitchen where he'd fix dinner while texting her, the living room where we'd watch TV together while he was probably thinking about her, the bedroom where we slept while he kept secrets. Everything was poisoned. And I realized it wasn't just about the cheating. It was about everything. It was about the years I'd erased myself, the dreams I'd put aside, the parts of me I'd buried to be the perfect wife, the dedicated mother, the efficient homemaker. Who was Helen without Richard? I didn't even know anymore. I'd lost myself so much in the role of wife that I'd forgotten what it was like to exist as an individual, and that needed to change. The next day, Friday morning, I waited for Richard to leave for work and picked up the phone. I called a lawyer that a friend had recommended to me years ago when another acquaintance of ours had gotten divorced. I made an appointment for Monday. I didn't tell Richard, I didn't tell anyone yet. But that call, that appointment scheduled in my calendar, gave me the first sense of control I'd had since I saw that message from Amanda. For the first time in days, I could breathe a little easier. Over the weekend, I called our kids, Marcus first, then Jennifer. They were two of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life. Marcus was silent for a long time after I told him, and when he finally spoke, his voice was shaky. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Dad really did this," I confirmed, and I heard him take a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I always thought you guys were the example, the couple that made it work." Geez. It hurt to hear that. It hurt to know I wasn't just destroying my own world, but also the image my kids had of their parents, of marriage, of what love was. But they deserved to know the truth. Jennifer cried on the phone with me, cried a lot, and said she was coming over next weekend, that she wasn't going to leave me alone. "Mom, you don't deserve this. You deserve so much better." And it was when she said that I finally let it all out too. I cried with my daughter, admitted I was lost, that I didn't know how to move forward, that I was scared of being alone at 62 after a whole lifetime as a couple. She let me talk, get it all out, and then said something that stuck with me. "Mom, you were already alone. At least now you can be alone without lies." Richard realized I'd called the kids when Marcus called him on Sunday. I heard the conversation from the bedroom. The door was open, and I could hear his voice from the living room, begging his son to understand, saying he'd made terrible mistakes, but that he loved his family, that he'd do everything to fix it. I didn't hear what Marcus replied, but from the way Richard collapsed on the couch afterward, head in his hands, I figured he hadn't been receptive. Serves him right. He had to face the consequences. He had to see the damage he'd caused, not just to me, but to our kids too. Monday morning, I left early, told Richard I was going to the doctor, that I had an appointment scheduled. He asked if I wanted him to come with me, and I almost laughed at the irony. Now he wanted to be attentive. Now he wanted to show up. I said no and left. The lawyer's office was downtown in one of those old but well-maintained buildings. Her name was Dr. Mariana Costa. She was about 50, short gray hair, and had a look that conveyed both competence and compassion at the same time. I sat in her office and told her everything. The affair with Amanda, the admission of another affair 8 years ago, the 6 months of lies. She listened to everything carefully, taking notes, and when I finished, she sighed. "Helen, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. Unfortunately, it's not an uncommon story in my office," she said, kindly but also objectively. She started explaining to me about the divorce process, how property division worked, how long it took, what my rights were. She talked about alimony, about the house, about the assets we'd accumulated over the course of the marriage. Said that since we were married under partial community property, Everything acquired during the marriage would be split 50-50. The house, the savings, the investments, everything. She also warned me that it was gonna be an emotionally draining process, that Richard would probably try to negotiate, that there would be tough moments, but she said I had the right to rebuild my life, that 62 wasn't old, that I still had a lot ahead of me. I left that office with a folder full of papers, information, documents I needed to gather, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. It wasn't happiness, far from it. It still hurt too much to be happiness, but it was clarity, a path, a direction. I wasn't gonna just stand there anymore, accepting crumbs of respect from a man who'd betrayed me multiple times. I was gonna move forward, rebuild, rediscover myself. Would it be hard? For sure. Would it hurt? No doubt. But staying in that situation, in that dead marriage, in that lie, that would hurt way more. That night, I sat down with Richard at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd had dinner together for years, where we'd celebrated the kids' birthdays, where we'd had breakfast on thousands of ordinary days. I put the lawyer's papers in front of me and took a deep breath. "I want a divorce," I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. He went completely white. His eyes filled with tears instantly. "Helen, no, please, don't do this. We can try again. I'll go to therapy. We can do couples therapy. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for this." But I shook my head. "No, Richard. It can't be made up for. It's not 6 months you need to make up for. It's 28 years. 28 years where I erased myself, where I put you and the boys first always, where I put my dreams aside to make yours happen, and you threw all of that away. Not once, but twice. And there probably would have been a third time, a fourth, if I hadn't found out." He sobbed, tried to hold my hand across the table, but I pulled away. "You're not sorry you cheated on me, Richard. You're sorry you got caught, and that makes all the difference in the world." In the following weeks, I started the process. I officially hired Dr. Mariana. Richard also got himself a lawyer, although he kept trying to convince me to give up on the divorce. But I was decided, firm. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for me, choosing my own happiness, my own dignity. Jennifer came to spend a weekend with me like she'd promised. We stayed up late talking, crying together, but also laughing. She told me stories from her firm, showed me pictures of trips she'd taken, and kept reminding me that there was a whole world out there beyond that failed marriage. Marcus called every week, asking how I was doing, offering support. Both of them made it clear they were on my side, that they supported my decision. That gave me tremendous strength. I found out from a neighbor, not Amanda, thank God, that she and Tom were also separating. Apparently, he'd found out everything and asked for a divorce right away. Part of me felt satisfaction about that. It wasn't exactly happiness, but a sense of justice. She'd destroyed my marriage and had lost hers in the process too. But that feeling passed quickly, because at the end of the day, none of us had gained anything from it. We'd only lost time, lost trust, lost the illusion of security that marriage supposedly brings. The divorce process took 5 months, 5 months of paperwork, negotiations, discussions about who would get what. Richard tried to negotiate until the end, offering to give me a bigger percentage of the house if I'd give us a second chance. Like money would fix it. Like material things could make up for lost dignity. I turned down all attempts at reconciliation. We split everything evenly, 50-50, like the law required. The house was put up for sale and sold quickly. It was a good house in a desirable neighborhood. With my half of the money, I bought a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, far from that neighborhood, far from the memories, far from Amanda and anything that reminded me of that life I had before. The apartment was small, modern, with a nice balcony that overlooked a park. I decorated it the way I'd always wanted but never could. Vibrant colors, plants everywhere, paintings I bought at art fairs. Every corner of that space was mine, genuinely mine, without compromises, without having to consider anyone else's taste. The first few weeks living alone were weird. The silence was really loud. I'd wake up in the morning and feel strange not hearing another person in the house. But little by little, I got used to it. And more than that, I started to like it. I started doing things I'd put aside for years. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at an art school near the apartment, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for because I was busy taking care of the house, the kids, Richard. I discovered I had some talent for it, or at least enough enthusiasm to keep trying. Classes were Tuesday nights, and I loved those 2 hours immersed in the colors, the texture of the paper, the concentration needed to make the right brush strokes. There were other women in the class, some my age, others younger, and little by little we created a friendship. After class we'd go have wine at a bar nearby, talk about life, about art, about everything and nothing. It was liberating to have conversations that didn't revolve around husband, house, obligations. Conversations where I was just Helen, not someone's wife, not someone's mom, just me. I also joined a walking group with women in my age range. We'd meet 3 times a week early in the morning at the park, walk for an hour, and then have coffee together. It was on these walks that I met Sonia, a 68-year-old woman who'd gotten divorced at 60 after finding out her husband had a second family in another city. She became a close friend, kind of a mentor. She showed me that life didn't end after a late divorce. Actually, according to her, it had only really begun. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I took my first solo trip. I'd always wanted to visit Italy, and during the marriage we always planned to go, but it was never the right time. There were the young kids, then there were their college expenses, then there was Richard's work that didn't allow long vacations. There was always some excuse, so I bought a round-trip ticket to Rome, booked a simple but charming hotel in Trastevere, and went. I spent 10 days walking the cobblestone streets, visiting museums, eating gelato and pasta, getting lost on purpose in the old alleyways. I took hundreds of photos, not to show anyone, but for myself, to record that I was there, that I'd done this, that I was capable of being in the world alone. One afternoon in Rome, sitting in a small cafe near the Pantheon, drinking an espresso and watching people go by, I had an epiphany. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt whole. Nothing was missing. I didn't have that emptiness I always felt, that constant feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. There, alone in a foreign city where nobody knew me, where I didn't have to be anything other than myself, I was complete. And I realized that emptiness I felt in the marriage wasn't loneliness. It was the absence of myself. Richard tried to keep in touch in the first months after the divorce. He'd send messages asking how I was doing, saying he missed me, asking if we could grab coffee, talk. At first, I'd respond politely, but coldly. Short answers, to the point. making it clear there was no room for reconciliation. Then I started taking longer to respond, and eventually I stopped responding most of the time. Not out of anger, the anger had passed a long time ago, but because there simply wasn't anything left to say. He was part of my past, and I was busy building my future. Some friends would ask me if I was thinking about dating again, about meeting someone. They'd always give that little laugh and say, "You're still young, Helen. You've got a lot of life ahead of you." And I'd laugh too, but I was sincere when I said I wasn't looking. Maybe someday, who knows? If it happens, it happens. But it wasn't a priority. My priority was myself, getting to know who Helen was at 63, rediscovering my tastes, my dreams, my desires. I'd spent so much time being defined by my relationships with other people that I needed this time to define myself alone, and it was turning out to be the best phase of my life. Today, 1 year and 8 months after that day in the kitchen when I saw Amanda's message, I look back and barely recognize the woman I was. That Helen who folded clothes mechanically, who accepted crumbs of attention, who was so scared of being alone that she'd rather live in a lie, she doesn't exist anymore. In her place is a woman who wakes up every day without needing anyone's approval, who makes decisions based on what she wants, who takes up space without asking permission. My apartment became my sanctuary. On the walls are my watercolors, some good, others not so much, but all made by me, with my hands, expressing something that comes from within. I have plants in every corner, a mini herb garden on the balcony where I grow seasonings and some vegetables. I wake up early, make my coffee the way I like it, really strong with just a bit of cinnamon, and drink it on the balcony watching the sun rise over the park. I read the books I always wanted to read but never had time for. I watch the movies Richard hated. I eat Japanese food for dinner sometimes, even knowing he couldn't stand sushi. They're small things, silly even, but they remind me every day that this life is mine. The kids visit me regularly. Marcus brought his family last month and we spent a whole weekend together. Him, his wife, the 2 grandbabies. I took them to the park. We had a picnic. And I saw something in my son's eyes that moved me. Pride. He was proud of me. Of the way I'd handled everything. Of the strength I'd shown. Of the new life I'd built. Jennifer's been calling me almost every week. We talk about everything. Work, relationships, future plans. She tells me about her doubts, her fears, and I give whatever advice I can, but always ending with, "But in the end, honey, you need to do what makes you happy, not what others expect from you." I think my own experience taught her that, in a way, words never could. She told me in one of those conversations that she's scared of marriage now, scared of ending up like I did. And I told her she didn't have to be afraid of loving, of committing. She just had to be afraid of losing herself in the process. Never stop being yourself, Jennifer, for anyone, not even for the most wonderful man in the world. Because if you lose yourself, there's no love that makes up for it. As for Richard, I heard through a mutual friend that he's seeing someone. A younger woman, obviously, seems to be a pattern with him. I didn't feel jealous or angry when I found out. I felt nothing. Maybe a little pity for the woman, whoever she is, because she has no idea what she's getting into. But it's not my problem anymore. He's not my problem anymore. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment having tea on the balcony and looking at the city below, I think about that Tuesday afternoon. I think about how a simple message lighting up a phone screen changed absolutely everything. And you know what's funny? I'm grateful. I'm grateful for seeing that message at that exact moment. I'm grateful for having the courage or the craziness, I don't know, to reply for him and set up that whole trap. Because if I hadn't done that, maybe I'd still be living in that comfortable lie to this day, in that illusion of a happy marriage, dying little by little inside without even realizing it. Did it hurt? It hurt more than anything I've ever been through in my life. It was months of nights crying, of doubting myself, of questioning every decision I'd made in the last 30 years. It was the hardest, darkest, scariest period of my existence, but it was also the beginning of something completely new. It was the start of me finally, at 62 years old, putting myself first. Of me realizing that my happiness didn't depend on being in a couple, on having a man by my side validating my existence, that I could and should be enough for myself. Did I lose a husband? I did. Did I lose a beautiful house I loved? I did. Did I lose 28 years of shared history? In a way, yes, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. I got myself back. I got my voice, my space, my freedom, my identity. I got the right to live my life my way without having to ask permission, without having to justify myself, without having to make myself smaller to fit into the spaces others defined for me. And that no one will ever take away from me again. At 63, I finally learned how to live, and life is good. It's mine, and it's just beginning.